Okay, clutch components. And take a good look at them. Here's the main components of the clutch. Flywheel. Flywheel is bolted to the back of the crankshaft. Okay? Big heavy weight, flat surface for the pressure plate to mount against to, gear for the starter motor. Okay? Bolted to the flywheel is the pressure plate. Now, the pressure plate gets bolted to the flywheel. This is probably not the right pressure plate for this flywheel. Okay? And so when the engine is turning, the flywheel is turning. When the flywheel is turning, the pressure plate is turning. These two are turning as one unit as that engine is turning. Okay? Inside the pressure plate, we have the plate itself. This is what's going to squeeze our disc, which is our next component, against the flywheel. Okay? Most pressure plates today have what they call a diaphragm spring. Diaphragm spring, when its clutch is engaged, is out, and it pushes the pressure plate down. When you push your foot on the clutch, you're pushing against here with the release bearing, and these little straps here are springs, and they're going to cause the pressure plate to move away. So pushing on here releases the pressure of the spring. These straps, 1, 2, 3, usually are springy, and they pull the pressure plate away. When that pressure plate moves away, the clutch disc is free to turn on its own. Clutch disc here, here is a side shot. Zoom in. There's the pressure plate itself. You can see that's that surface that the disc sits against. This is the diaphragm spring, and you can see how the diaphragm spring pivots over here on this little spring, goes all the way around, and this pivots, and when we push on here this way with the release bearing, it's going to allow the straps, this one the straps are up in here, okay, and the straps are in here, and it's going to cause that pressure plate to move this way. They're going to pull the pressure plate this way. Okay. The clutch disc, okay, we have our friction material, we have springs here, and that allow us to absorb some of the shock of the vibrations when you change RPM, so no one's perfect with their foot, so when you're on and off with the pedal a little bit, it's going to be some shock. Also, if you drop the clutch too fast, so that it doesn't rip this thing apart. The friction material is attached to some more springy, okay? So if you can see, this is part of the disc. It's where the friction material is riveted to. Okay? It's got some spring to it. It's hard to see, but there is a gap. There is a gap in here. Can we zoom in on the gap? So there is a gap. So when this clutch engages, that there's a little bit of cushion spring there before that thing gets squished right down. Again, it absorbs some of the shock of hard shifting, hard dropping of the clutch. We all do it either on purpose or by accident, especially when you're teaching your teenage daughter how to drive. Okay, so the clutch disc is splined to the input shaft of the transmission. This is an input shaft of the transmission we'll be working on. Okay, so whenever the clutch is engaged, i.e. your foot's off the pedal and it's squeezed, it's turning the transmission. When we put our foot on the pedal and the pressure plate moves away, the engine keeps turning, the disc stops turning. Okay? So this is being turned, that's your output. Okay, that's how it is. Everyone who's done a clutch has seen it, that shaft there, and that supports it. Okay, so those are the parts, the main parts of the clutch. The main parts Flywheel, first part. Pressure plate, bolted to the flywheel. The disc gets squeezed in between the flywheel and the pressure plate. Those are your three main components of the clutch. The only other part that's left is the release bearing. This one here, the release bearing's got the slave cylinder mounted to it. Release bearing rides along the center of the diaphragm spring, and when you apply, it pushes down. And then it causes that pressure plate to move up. So actually the push down causes move up. Pretty nifty. Someone was thinking. All right? Done. Okay. So this is clutch trainer. Okay, I'm going to try to explain all the different parts of the clutch again. Okay, so attached to the lever. Can we see the lever?
You can see the lever.
There's the lever. This is your clutch master cylinder, and behind here looks like a little mini master cylinder with just one piston in it. Okay, they all look the same. So when you're pushing down here, we're pushing on the clutch master cylinder. Lever, class 2 lever. Okay, up here, up on this side, here's your slave cylinder. So when you're pushing down on here, or pushing on the master, the slave is applying. We've got our clutch fork and our release bearing. So you can see when we push down, the slave comes out, pivots on the release fork, pushes in on the release bearing. Okay? We have clutch engaged. So clutch engaged is when the clutch is actually doing its work. We got the engine turning, we have our output shaft turning, or the output from the clutch is to the input shaft of the transmission, which we showed in the other video. Okay, when we disengage the clutch, here I'm going to push this in and put the lever down so I have my hands free. The engine is turning, but you can see there is no power output, so the transmission is not turning. Okay? So this is what's happening. So we got the clutch disengaged. Remember that. Disengaged, foot on the pedal. Engaged, foot off the pedal. Parts again of the clutch. Flywheel. Flywheel is bolted to the crankshaft. Pressure plate. Pressure plate is bolted to the flywheel. So whenever the engine is turning, the flywheel and the pressure plate are turning as one unit. These are called driving members. These are driving. The clutch disc, which is in here, I hope you can see it. Mm-hmm. So the pressure plate is this orange backing inside here. That's the clutch disc right in there. So when we can zoom right in, okay, and if you watch, when I push down on the clutch, you can see the pressure plate move away from the disc. And when that clutch is disengaged, let's put this little strap back on here. Now the disc is free to turn. It's no longer squeezed. So the engine turns, the clutch disc does not turn. So this is what this nice little handy-dandy trainer is teaching us. So you can see engine's turning, the engine will turn. We have no output to the transmission. All right? See? Transmission output, nothing. Okay? And if the vehicle was in gear and the vehicle was moving, this is going to be turning based on being pushed by the wheels, and this is going to be turning pushed on by the engine. Disengaged, and as we start to release, you can see as the pedal comes up, it now starts to engage, and now the clutch is turning, engaged, and we have output. This is blind to the input shaft of the transmission, and the transmission starts to turn. Okay, just to make sure that you can really see this. Flywheel, pressure plate, clutch disc. Right now, with the clutch engaged, these two are moving. That clutch disc is jammed in there. Thousands of pounds of force. You're not going to turn that no matter how hard you try. As we start to disengage the clutch, you can see right there the pressure plate starts to move away from the disc. And now that disc is free to turn. Okay, and you can see the gap. There's not a lot of gap in there. It does not move very far. And then it engages, and as soon as it gets in contact, it starts to grab, and now the whole unit moves as one. Disengaged, free, engaged, clamp tight. So, release bearing against the diaphragm spring. If we have a cable or lever operated clutch, this release bearing needs to release from the diaphragm spring. If it doesn't have enough free play, it might press in a little bit, and if you could see just a little bit, that's even like you riding the clutch. You got your foot resting on the clutch. You can see how that diaphragm spring is moving just a little bit, and when that diaphragm spring is moved in a little bit, we don't have full clamping force up on top. No. Okay? So when you are pushing down on the clutch, you are pushing those diaphragm springs in, and that's what's causing the release. You're releasing the pressure, and when you release the pressure, those little straps pull it away. No, my hand won't work. Okay?
Got it.
Okay. Good. Just a couple of moves. There we go. That's it.
Perfect.
Okay, I better put this away.